All right, so compressor number 5 keeps on going off an oil failure. So really quick, we're gonna go over here, we're gonna check our oil reservoir. As you can see, there's nothing's in our oil reservoir. So the first thing that we're gonna check on an oil failure is the refrigerant level. Let's take a look. Nothing in the surge tank. And if we go over to the sight glass, it's flashing. Okay, so why do we check refrigerant level? It's not going to operate appropriate if it doesn't have the right amount of refrigerant, because that refrigerant, if the oil goes out to the cases, which it will, okay, it needs refrigerant to push it back to the rack. So oftentimes people will see a level like that and they'll start filling up with oil, when in reality, if you just had enough refrigerant in the system, the oil would have no problem returning to the reservoir. So the first thing we got to do is we got to solve this liquid level issue, find the leak and repair it, and then we can move on to troubleshooting these oil issues further. But until we do that, then we don't know if this is actually an oil issue or if it's a pressure issue. The second reason why is because if there's less refrigerant in your system, we've all seen it on a single condensing unit, your system pressures are going to satisfy quicker. So your suction pressure is going to be easier to satisfy, and your condensing temperature, if you're really low on gas, will be easier to satisfy as well. So that means that your compressors are going to be less likely to run. That means that you could have, like for instance, this compressor has a lot of oil in it. You could just have one sitting for weeks or hours at a time, days at a time, that fills up with oil because it's inactive, right? And now the oil will find its way to the compressor through the suction line, because high goes to low, and the oil will naturally migrate into that compressor, and now you have a compressor that's filled with oil because it hasn't been running. You know, some of that is, you know, compensated for by this controller and the program in the controller, but it's not compensated enough for. So if you don't have enough refrigerant, again, you can't properly check your oil system. So we're going to go buy some refrigerant, put it in, I'm going to find the leak and repair it, and then we can move on. Right, so it's been a day later or so, okay, and you can see that this oil reservoir has still not filled up. Typically it'll fill up the same day of, and a day later, compressor number 5 is still down on oil failure. So we're going to troubleshoot the system and look, and now I found the leaks and I added refrigerant to the system. So you can see we have 2 balls floating in the surge tank, and a full column refrigerant to our system. So now we're set up to properly troubleshoot an oil failure, because if your pressures in your systems aren't right, you can't properly troubleshoot the system to begin with. So remember, an oil system is a system, not just compressor 5, but a whole system. We're going to look at that turbo shed, see if that's working okay. All right, so first thing, we're just going to take the pressure differential across this turbo shed. Why? Because sometimes these things will be clogged, or there'll be something inside there that's causing some type of restriction. I don't think that's the case, but I'm just going to do it to double check and to verify, because I know that I feel like it's feeling oil, but we're just going to double check for now. So you have this line going into it, so I'm on the inside, and then you have to take pressure on the other side, on the outside. But here's the problem: you have your hot gas differential valve here. So if I take a pressure here, this hot gas differential valve might be affecting that. So I could just go through and verify that there's no hot gas currently on, or I can hook up someplace else. So if I follow this line, follow that line, it's going to go over there, because this line is before the hot gas valve. I can find all the way through here, I can hook up over there, and that's going to be the same pressure before the hot gas line. So now I can get an accurate pressure across it, which is about 1 psi drop across it, which is completely fine. We're talking like you're looking to like 11. I've seen, and that's just because I've seen on different oil separators that an 11 psi drop across it is what they don't like, and that's when you start getting to the red zone. So just 1 psi, more than likely it's just the psi drop from the distance being far away. So more than likely this is dead on. There's no psi drop, if any at all, just because the world's not perfect. So now we're moving on to the next thing. Okay, so next up, now from here we're checking our next section, which is, we're gonna check down there, right? Make sure that this is open right here. This is open, and now this is open over there. Okay, these are both open. All right, and we're gonna notice on the bottom side, we're at 182, and then up at the top, we're at 167, okay? So that's almost a 20 PSI pressure differential. That's telling me that this filter is clogged. So with that 20 PSI pressure differential, this is bad. Now, I mean, this is literally like not even, you know, like 2 feet of line. So there's obviously a restriction in here. We're gonna need to replace this guy. Now, number 2, this actually tells me some second information, and it's that we don't have enough oil for the rack. Now, well, more than likely, we gotta check some other things later, but more than likely we don't have enough oil. Now, I add oil maybe once a year. This isn't common to not have enough oil. Now, what leads me to that conclusion? 1, there's a restriction here, so if anything, we should be building up oil. 2, I just repaired the leak, topped off the refrigerant, it's flowed through the system. If there was any oil trapped somewhere, it should have came back to the oil separator, but it didn't. 3, if you look down on the ground, you can see all this pickup stuff. I found a leak here a couple months ago on a compressor, and it was on the unloader of the compressor, and there was oil all over the compressor, because 90% of your oil, I mean, that's just like an approximation, I don't know the exact amount, will stay in this loop of being blasted out of your compressor discharge, collected by your turbo shed, put through your oil line, back to your compressor. It just loops around, and 90% of your oil will stay in there. So if you have a major oil loss, it'll be because of a leak in the oil line, or it'll be from a leak from the head of the compressor, or a valve on the compressor, or something on the compressor. Now, you can lose oil over time out on the floor with leak after leak after leak after leak after leak, and then 10, 20 years go by, and now you have to top off your oil. But too often people jump to that conclusion. So right now I'm leaning towards that we need oil and we need to change that filter, but we're not done. Remember, this is a system. Those 2 things could be wrong, but that doesn't mean that everything else is fine too. Like, why does only compressor 5 fail and no other compressor seems to care about oil failure? So we're gonna keep moving down the line and keep just checking and checking, and then we're gonna come up with our diagnosis at the end. Now again, this is just one piece of the system. So even though this is wrong, more than likely there's not enough refrigerant in the system, okay? We just can't assume that nothing else is wrong all the way down. But until we repair that, we can't really troubleshoot too much further, like with these differential valves. We can't really do that. But one more thing we can do is we can look at the compressors and make sure that there's no one compressor that's absorbing too much oil. So we're just gonna take our flashlight and look at all these oil flows. That one has a full one. That one has a full one. That one has a full one. Full one. Full one. That one has half. That one's a full one. Full quarter. Full quarter. Okay? So the reason I did that is because, you know, the ones that are overly full in oil, sometimes you can look on the back and you'll even see them like dripping or sometimes like drooling with oil if they're just hogging it. Okay? None of these seem to be hogging oil. They just seem to be appropriately full. Maybe I could neck it back on the oil regulators a little bit, but it shouldn't be enough to make this oil reservoir go to zero. So now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come up here and I'm going to verify that none of these compressors are manually turned off or that they're tripped. Because if their breaker is tripped, that could mean that it's hogging oil, then the controller tried to start it up or something like that. So nothing is tripped, nothing is manually off. So I'm going to do one more test to test the compressors to make sure that there's none of them that might be hogging oil. So now I'm in the controller. I went to the suction group and I manually on every single compressor. Manual on, manual on, manual on, manual on. All of them, you know. So now we're going to go through and we're going to go, okay, see, this is on. Sucked in, sucked in, sucked in. Not on. This is compressor number 5. But if we hit the oil failure button, that would turn right back on, I'm sure. I hit that on. There we go. Compressor 5 is running. Go to 6, on. 7, on. 8, sucked in, on. 9, on. And 10, it's kind of hard to see. Let me use my flashlight to double verify. 10 says it's off. Oh boy. Now let's take a look at 10. 10 is manual on. Let's take a look over here. Doesn't feel like it's going any safety strip. The oil's not on, it'll be reporting it. But high pressure safety for number 10 was off. So number 10 could have been hogging oil. And that might be where all of our oil went, but we still need to replace that filter. Now let's see. This does have a pretty full amount of oil in it. If we look down here, yeah, that high pressure safety is set a lot lower than all the others. So we're going to have to adjust that value on the high pressure safety. And we're going to look at this compressor more. I'm going to try to pump out all the oil out of it and see. Okay, so really quick now, just showing you. I hooked up to this oil pump right there, going into my gauges, going out over here, and it's going down into this suction header over there. Now, I also manually turned on all 3 of the compressors, just 1, 2, and 3, everything on that header, so the oil would get sucked into the compressors, blown out the discharge, and make its way back over to the oil separator. Now, did it move? Nope. Didn't move. Did this move? Yes, it did. Now we're halfway full. So I'm going to open this valve back up there. So what I'm going to do now is it's very possible that it's just taking a little bit for the oil that went into that header to make its way back to the reservoir. I don't know. I actually am leaning towards that this is low on oil still, but I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive to the store, buy the filter, come back in, install the filter, and then we can go, oh, okay, we need oil. Add oil to it if we need it. So we're going to do that now, and then we can keep just troubleshooting down the line. Alrighty, so I picked up a new filter. If you care to know, it's OF303T. You can see that right over there, OF30, whatever, and then you got some part number up there. Anyway, I showed that picture of the guy at United, got me a filter. Okay, so you can see I have it valved off here, have it valved off there, and now I'm connecting this to my gauges. It's going through my gauges, right, and I can already see that the oil's almost gone out of there, so there's not going to be a lot of oil in there, which is good. It's going back into the system. And I'm doing this first because I don't want to suck any oil into my recovery machine. So I closed that also because I want to make sure as little pressure escapes into this thing as possible. Also, I just wanted to show you there is actually one ball in the receiver floating now. Does that mean that we don't need oil? Yeah, I don't know. We're going to hook it up and see how it goes. So right now I got my gauges hooked up. It's going to go through my gauges. It's going to be sucked through my gauges. Going to hook it up to the inside of this recovery machine. We're going to open it up, and it's going to be going out of the recovery machine into the suction side of the rack. So just got to find a plug. Now, if you're worried about your recovery machine drinking oil, you could maybe get a longer hose and connect it to like the low temp suction header over here. Bring it down to an even lower temperature. Make sure almost all the oil is evacuated. Or maybe you could even just kind of put the oil in a cup, that's coming out of it. But so I can clearly see that there's just refrigerant in it. So I'm just going to recover it down as low as I can. and then I'm going to open this up and replace it. So before you replace, always verify what you have. Yeah, looks about right. And you see it's directional right there. So place it in the direction that we know that it flows out, flows up this way, through that way, and it matches the direction that's there. You can see here there's a little bit of frost buildup right there. That's just because of the pressure drop, and you can even feel that this is really cold as well. So I just thought that was interesting to point out. So you can see we recovered it into a slight vacuum. So now we're just going to open it up and change it out. So you can see the bottom's unthreaded, top's unthreaded. Now we're going to do this guy. Just comes right out. Put the other one back in and button it all up. Just to show you, that does not have a straighter in it. Put a straighter in it, please, so when somebody comes, they won't just like open it up to look and go, oh, let me take a look at this thing, and then, you know, let me just gauge up and check the oil pressure, and then, you know, it goes everywhere all over them, and then they hate their life, and they have to shut down the rack, and just sadness is just in their heart. You see, that takes 2 seconds, not hard. Put in the straighter. Got the straighter in, connected, good to go. So now I'm going to pull a vacuum on it. As you can see, hooked up there, up to my gauges, out of my gauges. This one is open with the blue one, causing the vacuum to go across my gauges all the way to my vacuum pump. So now we're just going to wait for this for a little bit. Going to try to get to 29 inches of water column, which is, for those of you watching, about 500 microns. You know, and if it's, yeah, we're just going to wait a couple minutes. All right, now that we pulled a 29-inch vacuum, we're going to open this up, like so. Open everything up. Okay, it's all opened up. Now we're going to take a look at our pressure. So yeah, I just wanted to show you it's now uniform, right? 155 at the top, 155 on the bottom. So it's plugged into there on the blue, plugged down there on the red, and you can see they are now equal. So now we can see, well, maybe you guys can't, but I remember. Look at right here. You see all this condensation? This was all frosted before because it was such low pressure because it wasn't feeding through. So now what we're going to do is we're going to see, this is our compressor 5, or problem compressor. We're going to hook up right here and see what pressure is now on the line. So this is a pressure differential valve. So what it does is it takes this 160 psi, 180 discharge pressure, and then it lowers it down to 20 above the suction on that compressor. So we can see that the back side of this valve, where did it go, is connected to this suction group. So that valve will keep it around 20 to 25 psi higher than this suction group. So those 3 compressors, right, that are all on this, all on that same oil line, so 5, 6, and 7, they keep tripping on oil failure over and over and over again. So we're going to have to keep digging into it, but now it's these 3 specifically that are the problem. So now that the oil filter is installed, to me, this is actually seeming like a floodback issue now. So what does that mean is, so now that we're at this point, you hear that? That's not a good sound. Okay, it sounds like those compressors are drinking liquid refrigerant from over there. That one of the cases is flooding it back. Now you can still see we now have 1 ball, sometimes 2 balls floating. So we should have enough oil. That filter has been replaced. All the other lines have, light has gotten better. And we can't even troubleshoot this valve properly until we fix what I'm almost positive at this point is now a floodback issue. So what is happening is the liquid refrigerant is going into the compressor and it's washing the oil out of the compressor, and it's also causing the compressor to stall, go off an oil failure, all kinds of issues. So we're going to go look at that now. Quick, how do you identify a floodback? Well, on a medium temp, you know, all these things should be like 32 degrees or 35 or something like that. You would have condensation, but you won't have ice. Here we go, frozen up like crazy. Now let's look at this. At 52 psi, 448, you're supposed to have a 25 degree coil. What is our temperature probe actually reading? 15. So this has a superheat of -10. And now also, to further my point, you can physically see liquid refrigerant dripping from my actual fitting just because my fittings are old. A happy accident. There should be no liquid in there. That should just be vapor. So we're going to shut this circuit down because those compressors are not liking it, and this is going to cause some serious issues. If you ever see something like that on a suction line, you know you have issues. That is a floodback issue if I've ever seen it. Now I'm going to check that differential valve, but really quick, we need to get all the liquid refrigerant out of this. So what I did was I valved off the liquid line over there. This is the liquid line to circuit 10. Okay, back there, this one. And now this is the suction side of circuit 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this just a smidge. Just enough that the liquid refrigerant will come out and slowly boil off and make its way back to the system. You can already see it's starting to melt like crazy because now it's not freezing anymore. I just want to show you, this is hooked up over here. You have 4737s hooked around to the back. That's not right. If you actually look up Hussmann Turbo Shed, right, this is a Hussmann rack. If you look up Hussmann Turbo Shed, they'll come up with a manual on it. Maybe I'll show the manual later on in the video. And it says in the oiling system, it should be 20 to 25 PSI above suction. This is the suction, 34, 45, that's not right. So we're gonna see if we can open this valve up a little bit, turn up that pressure. So it's just like a TXV, you take off the cap, it looks just like a TXV. We pop this on the end and we're just gonna turn it just a little bit, see what happens to the pressure. So you can see now that's about 20 PSI above, which is perfect. So I found on these guys, you actually turn it to the right, opposite of a TXV to increase it. I'm gonna turn it just a smidgen more, that way. It might be like a 22, 23, but it'll look, that's exactly 20. So that's good to go on that. So that's been adjusted correctly. So far we found the filter was no good. There was low refrigerant. That valve was not set properly. And we have floodback issues. So we're going to keep moving. So now that that valve has been adjusted and we shut off the feedback issue, there has not been an oil failure. So now let's take a look, see if we can figure out what's wrong with the feedback. So basically here's circuit 10. So what we're going to do is we're going to shut off one evap and see if that helps, and then we're going to shut off the other. So up here to this hand valve, I'm just going to turn it like so. I'm going to go up top and see if it's any better. So I'm now taking the temperature here, setting this up again to see if I shut off what evap, does it make any difference. So you can physically see the frost is receding, and you can see my clamp is at 34. So that left side evap coil is where the issue is. So let's take a look. Just to verify, you see the moment I turn it back on, it's back down to 13. So it's definitely that evap. Let's take a look. We're at the coil. Obviously this TXV is feeding far too aggressively. This is like a low temperature right now. So we're gonna close it up and as far as we can, and we can see if that's gonna kind of fix it, at least for now, until we can get a new TXV. So I stemmed that thing in as far as up as it could go, and it seems like we got ourselves a good old-fashioned infinity valve. And that's what happens when technicians come and they just keep on messing with TXVs and messing with TXVs and messing with TXVs. The threads now no longer do anything. It's not grabbing on anything. It's an infinity valve. Somebody's gone past the point where they're supposed to. Something screwed up in this valve. It now no longer has any type of way of regulating how it is, and there seems to be no stop to how tight it can go. So we're going to have to ramp this valve for replacement. So what we're going to do is we're going to close it as close as we possibly can, like as much in, and I think this is as far as it will go. And we're going to take the superheat up at the rack and make sure it's not flooding out our compressors anymore. So you can see that cranking it all the way in, we now have a temperature of 34, which is much more manageable. And down actually at the coil, probably should have done it, we have a superheat of -5. So it's still overfeeding, but it's not overfeeding enough to cause our compressors to trip on oil. And we can also see we have not had an oil failure in the entire hour that I've been troubleshooting everything. And previously it was every like 10 minutes that we have an oil failure. Now, I think this is where I'm going to end it for today. I'm going to go home, you know, get some grub, do what I got to do. But just to show you, this oil reservoir is gone again. So now I'm leaning towards, I think we got to add a gallon of oil, get at least one ball floating. Now that everything seems to be working right. But I think I'm going to have to come back here again and keep troubleshooting further. So yeah, I think I'll end it now. I'll release a part 2 when I come back, if I ever come back. But I think this is like a good learning video to post. So I guess I'll just post it as it is, and just, if you learn something, you'll learn something. People have been asking me to troubleshoot an oil issue and record it, but they're just so complicated and there's so much to them that typically I never get around to posting it. So anyway, like, subscribe and all that, and yeah, just let me know in the comments below if you learned something, or like you got some wisdom you want to comment, or whatever. Yeah, thank you. That's how you do it.